I see you started right away or at least in your what is in LinkedIn your career as a character TD. So you didn't do anything previous to that.
Yeah, and that's an interesting story. So when I finished school, I like many people thought I was going to be an animator, and I realized I was horrible. I wasn't a very good artist, and I was planning on going to like 2D animation school to learn actual animation. Even though I hated drawing, but I wouldn't admit it to myself. But I was like, I want to be a good animator. I wanted to go work on feature animation and stuff like that. And between when I kind of graduated my 3D course and then when I was working up to apply to like this other school, I was working like just a retail job, and then I saw a job posting for this studio in Toronto that was just looking for students, right? So I applied. I had my little garbage student demo reel, which will never see the light of day, and on a VHS tape of all things. And then
we are dating ourselves.
Maybe it was a DVD. I don't remember. It was a while ago. And then I applied and I got this job. And it was this little startup studio that hired only students, brand new. We were doing straight to DVD, preschool show that only really got like 2 DVDs out. But the studio had no pipeline. We had a shared folder on a computer, and the naive idea was that everyone would model, everyone would rig, everyone would animate, like a student project.
Yes.
And of course that completely didn't work. Everything started breaking. I had kind of already had like a natural technical bent. My reel had a bunch of kind of like rigging in it. Like I remember, I think I was like 18 at the time, whatever, playing with like soft bodies in Maya to try and do like automatic IK and stuff like overlap and that kind of jazz. But then what happened is that everything started falling apart. We had like major production disasters like right away, as you can imagine, with no pipeline. So I got like a Mel Scripting for my animators book, and I read it on the train to and from work, and I was like writing, and I think I wrote my first Mel script in like Microsoft Word. Because I had no idea what I was doing, right? But I learned, and it became like kind of like a trial by fire. And by the time we finished the first episode, which took way too long, just fixing broken Maya scenes and stuff, like I ended up writing my first auto rigger, which had the kind of novel idea to let animators build the rigs in the shot. So they could kind of specify, whether they wanted like IK arms or IKFK arms, and they could like assemble the rig in the shot. And not necessarily a great idea. It had its own problems, but it was ambitious and it was fun. But I actually kind of dived into being a character D right from the get-go. And this was like, pre-YouTube and stuff, right? Like 3D, there was like CG Talk and a couple forums, and that was the extent of like online stuff. I had a couple of people that I chatted with and would ask questions for, but I just remember just like reading through the Maya's like node references just to like find out what nodes are even there, what can I even do, trying to figure it out. And then so that company lasted, I guess, like a year and a half or 2 years or something like that. I still work with a bunch of people from, I've worked with a bunch of people from that studio since, who've gone to all different parts of the industry, which is kind of fun. And then from there, I just kind of went on to, kind of some small VFX studios in Toronto and kind of just stayed around Toronto mostly. But what was interesting is that the majority of the places I worked, I was the only kind of technical Maya person, or the only rigger, at least, like on a technical rigger. So I was always kind of put in these positions where I was coming up against challenges that I didn't know how to tackle, and I had to kind of figure it out myself.
Yeah, I see. Yeah, and do you feel like in these places that I mean, sometimes I've been in that situation that it's hard to stay true to one path on, like, normally it depends of the size, but if you are the only one, you tend to pivot to other areas that maybe it's not like something that it's the most the ones that you like the most. Like it happened to me, like ended up doing like pipeline, like shotgun integrations on things like that, that it was not my first like call, like let's say, and still I avoided as soon as I could.
Yeah, that definitely did happen. There were some times where I was writing just like directory creation templates and stuff like that, and you make a new character, you need all these kind of standard folders and farm submission for geometry caching, and like it's fun because I think at the core, like I like challenges, right? Like I like solving problems. So I mean, while I wouldn't necessarily want to like be a database administrator or something, like still when you get to dabble in something new for a short time, it can be a lot of fun.
Yes, I agree totally on that, and that's true. I've been in the same situations like you said, like handling caches and things like that, render farm stuff, and it's really fun when you start digging new like path. But then, I mean, if it drag you too much out of your, like, let's say, main axis of rotation, then is where you, oh, wait, I don't want to go that path that far. Unless for me, I was fearing that I will be take apart from characters, the part that I like the most.
Yeah, you have to still care about ultimately what you're doing, unless it's just something you're doing for a month or two or something. But yeah, absolutely.
And so, and just jumping a little bit on time. So now you are at Guru Studios. That I know Guru Studios from, I mean, some of the projects that came from the studio. That's I guess it's really big one. I mean, I don't know how big
yeah,
but...
I think we're a little over 400. I don't know. It's hard to keep tabs now that we're all remote. But currently we're doing 2 3D shows, and we have 2 2D shows in production as well. So there's a bunch of people there. So the main one we do obviously is Paw Patrol, and now we're working on a new. We're just starting a new project with Sesame Street, which is fun because you get to work on Muppets.
Yeah, my kids love Paw Patrol. We have Chase, the doll.
Yeah,
and some
everyone
books
loves Paw
also.
Patrol. I haven't done any work on it actually, but yeah. So when I've been at Guru for 2.5 years, and when I came, they were in need of an overhaul to their rigging pipeline. Essentially, they'd had a dated auto rigger that was serviceable, but it wasn't necessarily meeting the production needs. And there were just a bunch of other production problems. So I really kind of tried to kind of like take stock of what the issues were and what the needs were, specific to the studio, kind of coming in, having not been at this, worked at the studio before, and kind of then came up with a plan of a system. but yeah, it was a really interesting process to just say, okay, well, what are the what are the weaknesses and strengths of like different strategies, and to really kind of dive into it. And when I worked at Toonbox a few years prior, I had become the maintainer of their auto rigging system. So I had, and we went through like a major kind of refactor on that, and I was really involved in it. And that was really beneficial because then when I went to start from something clean, I had like a base point. Like I knew what worked on that system, and I knew what didn't work on that system. And then I specifically kind of tried to target the things that like broke down. Like as an example, the system they had at Toonbox relied very heavily on Maya scenes to store data, right? Like your kind of like definition template of what, where your guides are and what the rig is and everything. That was stored in a Maya scene. Blend shaped targets were stored in a Maya scene and stuff. And that ultimately just led to files kind of slowly bloating in size, and the build times for rigs getting a lot slower. So then I made the choice to try to keep as much data outside of Maya as possible. And pretty much I stored 90% of everything in JSON.
Yeah, that's I think for me, Maya file, it's as much as I can, it's something that it's the ultimate goal to build this Maya file, but is I I will try to avoid as much as I can on to have it the data relying on Maya files. And you know, especially, I mean, you can take care and keep everything clean, but there is a tendency to collect garbage on Maya files for any reason, like someone open with a plugin loaded that should not, or things like that. And you have tools to counterbalance that, but I feel like it's wrong to instead. It's like contra animating instead of going forward. It's trying to keep clean stuff that gets garbage collected. I will say it's not garbage,
and
but
it wasn't
you know,
really
data that you
designed
don't
to
need.
be. It was never designed to be serialized rig data, right? Like the Maya format was designed to be a general purpose scene file.
Yes.
You know, and it's old, for better or worse. You know, it's served, you know, a lot of people really well, but it was, you know, designed in the late 90s. So it's not necessarily what you want. And when you break things up into your own formats, then you can really choose like how the data structures work and stuff like that.
Yes. The so you rely mainly on JSON, or do you? Well, I like 90% you say, like, yeah, I think.
Yeah, I played around with different file formats like YAML and Pickle and whatever, but I decided to just go with JSON, mostly just because it's easy, it's human readable. It's basically you look at the text file and it's basically just like a dictionary, a Python dictionary. We were also already using it in other places at Guru, so just decided to keep things consistent to just stick with JSON, and I haven't had any issues with it. I store everything like the main rig definitions, which have a lot of different stuff in it, and all the way to skin weight files and blend shape deltas and everything, just all get extracted into JSON. Unfortunately, the Guru doesn't deal with really high poly meshes, right? Like we're not doing, we never have any rigs with like 100,000 or 1,000,000 polygons or any huge number, because it's kids TV. So I never really ran into any performance issues. Like loading the JSON file into Python is always super quick.
Yeah, if I can compare, like with in Gear, we have basically, I will say, like Gears, like 90% it's JSON, and we have for the skinning only that we also have the alternative to use Pickle, because it's compressed and it's faster to load. So when we have high resolution characters, it's a little faster to process the data, but obviously we cannot edit the files if it was needed. And before on Gear, on Softimage, was XML files for the guide description and so on. That that was hard to, even it's a human readable. I found much more harder to handle that at human editing.
Yeah, that was the other kind of choice with JSON, is that at the end of the day is you can, if push comes to shove, someone can just open the file and hack it. Like you can do a search and replace and you can change stuff to a point if you have to. So it kind of adds a bit of a safety net as far as when you're designing the system, right?
Yes. And one thing, it's talking about all this data and serialization. It's we was talking off mic before, like the granularity. That's something that's very interesting for me. How far you go for break everything in little pieces?
So the crux of the system, like that I'm working with, it essentially each asset, on a production has its own little, collection of rig data, and that can differ depending on the asset, right? So the rigger, if an asset is like a basic prop and doesn't have any skinning in it, then there's no skin weight data, right? It's just it depends on how the rigger sets it up. But yeah, the granularity is tricky, and while the kind of balance I have right now works, I don't know if I've necessarily nailed the sweet spot. So as an example, I have the main definition file, and that essentially includes the Rift, which is the name of the system I've made, is it's a modular, right? So you can drop in modules and connect them together. So like a lot of other systems, and within that definition, it specifies kind of all the pivot points, any kind of preferences for the module, like what color the controls are for the arm or whatever, and some other things. And that kind of works. There's a whole like back end, class that manages like that whole file format and stuff. But then what I regret doing is then I separated out, I have a separate file for control curve sizes. So essentially, when you build a rig, you have like just the control curves are all in the default sizes or shapes, right? But then you kind of always want to resize them to fit the asset, right? You grab the CVs and you tweak them so it works better. And if you're rebuilding the rig all the time, you need to save those tweaks and something. So I had just created its own separate data type for that, for the control curve shapes. And I think I kind of did it because that's the way we did it at Toonbox, and I never really questioned whether it was ideal. But then you run into a problem where if, for example, in the definition, if you rename a module, right, it will update all the data within that that definition file, but it doesn't understand anything outside of that definition. So now suddenly the control curves might be trying to resize a control that doesn't exist anymore because it's a different name. And currently the solution, because this thing's still a work in progress and we're kind of still in beta, is, you hack the JSON file, you open it up, you just search and replace, or you just resize it, and then resave it. And it'll import the ones that it does find, and the new ones you fix and you resave it.
If you feel better, for one part, we put together on mgear the guide definition and the controls that you create. You can edit. It tries to guess by the proportions some stuff, but normally you edit everything and then you extract it and pack it together. But if you change the names of the component, the guide, it will not find it. It's the same thing. So even I have this store in the same file, but I don't. One thing is, so you can change the name of the component without opening the guide. That's correct?
Well, yeah, because it's an integrated system. So essentially what I have is there's a whole class that is basically the API for this definition schema, right?
Yes.
And when you open up all this information isn't, you use Maya a little bit, but it's all storing back. When you launch the definition, it opens up a PyQt UI that has its own node graph, right? And you drop all the modules in there and wire them up.
I see.
And then anything you change in Maya, there's a callback that goes back and updates the instance of the schema inside this that's held in this UI, right? And then when you save, this schema class just dumps its internal data structure to JSON and
okay. So you have something that update the data with the way that you do it is you have the rig already built, or it's just like this in between definition of the rig that can be a guide or something like that?
It's just data. So essentially so what happens is that when you start with a blank definition, there's no data, you drop in a module, and then maybe you'll decide to show the guides in Maya, right? So then you reposition the guides, the callback saves their pivot points and stuff. And then that guide information is associated with the module, right? So in the data structure, the key to the dictionary is the name of the module, and then you have the guide information with it, right?
Yes.
So then when you rename the module from the UI, it then calls this class, that's the API, and then it goes through and says, okay, I'm going to find this module, I'm going to rename it in its internal data structure, and then it will find any relationships to it. So any connections between another module and that module or anything else. And it just kind of goes through and finds everything. Then it updates then it, once it finishes that, it triggers a refresh and the UI, recycles and everything. The only time where things will get out of sync is if like you build a module. So it creates the actual, say, ARM rig in Maya's viewport, and then you rename it in the UI. It's not syncing between the Maya session. I could that would be a nice to have feature, but in practice, it doesn't really inhibit workflow too much.
Yeah,
because you can just delete the module in Maya and then everything will get cleaned up and then you rebuild it.
Yeah, it's very interesting and it's very. It looks very sophisticated. That's great, but yeah, we and the way that we do it, it's a bit more like simple because we the interface it's in Maya when you, so basically the guide represents the rig description in a visual way with some attributes and things. So you need to, I mean, you can edit the JSON file, and indeed we have a little editor that it's a bit raw, but you can do stuff even with this editor. But basically you need to load the guide in Maya, and then you change parameters, you change the stuff there, and re-export the updated. So it's the, even it's an in-between step. It's your interface, or the way that you interact with this description is by loading this guide and editing this guide in the 3D space with the attributes. But yeah, same thing, even if it's there. And we have the curves hide when you load them, these guide, you load the curves and are there. But if I change the name, and maybe I should do, maybe I can, if I change the name, for instance, instead of arm, I put, I don't know, something like extra arm, I don't know, to change the name. So, but I have already all the controls that was adjusted previously, even if it's in the guide, even if it's loaded on Maya and I have the curves hidden somewhere in the structure, it doesn't update it. But now that I'm thinking, maybe.
So I guess the question, so when you build the guides in your scene, then when you go to save it, does it then go to try to retrieve the information from the Maya scene again?
Yes.
Okay.
So it's,
I think that's probably, that would be where the challenge is, because when you keep it all just in data and it's all just within the dictionary, like basically this big fat dictionary, then you can just write methods within your code to just go and search that dictionary for certain keys and replace things and stuff.
Yes.
You don't have to worry about then keeping the state kind of going in Maya. Like in my system, anything while you're defining the rig, anything you do in the viewport is like ephemeral, right? It's temporary.
Yeah.
And you just will often go to a new scene, wipe it all out and stuff, and then you kind of keep working, because the UIs that I've made are what actually hold on to the data in the system. The one exception is like deformer weights. When you're skinning, you have to like paint the skin weights, and then you have to save, and then it will actually go and find all the the skin modules in the scene and get the skin clusters and save the data and dump that out to JSON. But that's just because there isn't really an alternative to that, right?
Yeah, but it's one thing is we have this simple interface, but now that we are talking, like, yeah, it's probably it's possible to go on that level, because basically what it does, the guide is a description, but and then the scene, but it never builds from the guide. What it does is parse the guide, and you have this big like dictionary that contains all the description, and then builds from that. So you don't need the guide indeed loaded on Maya to build. You can build directly from the files and edit the files on the fly. There is none right now. The in between is there, the data, but there is no interface to, like, you have to edit that data on the fly like this. But very interesting like approach, and yeah, I think it can be really cool to have that. So you load, change the stuff, and you can build, so it can be faster to iterate.
One thing that I like, a kind of rule that I've set for myself is that the data always has to kind of be decoupled from both the Maya scene and like any UIs that I make, right? Like the data structure has to kind of be standalone.
Yeah.
So with this definition, it keeps all the the minimum data that it needs to build it, and then when it builds it, it goes retrieves the actual module, or I guess component, as you call it in MGear, and then it runs the code to actually build the arm or build the leg or the wheel or whatever it is, right? But yeah, just kind of keeping it separate, and then what that allows me to do is then when I actually go to build the whole rig, I don't ever have to like load up the UI or import something in the Maya scene. Like, I just, I mean, the guides for me just basically turn into a list of matrices, right?
Yeah.
It's just,
Exactly.
these are the positions of the pivot points of the basic pivot points that I need to construct this module, whatever that is. And then it goes and builds from there.
Yeah, I think it's very in the same, like I would say, school. Both system. It's really cool. I really always fascinating talking with people like you, like how we get to some like common grounds on this design to solving some situations. It's very cool, and I find say like very cool to see that I'm not crazy in some situations. Like I'm not going like bananas and doing stuff that maybe it's completely out of any common sense. That's cool.
Yeah, well, I mean, like, and I don't claim that I've done anything terribly original. A lot of it was inspired by the system we had at Toonbox, which was inspired by some other studio that someone else had worked at, and ideas just grow and change over time, and they adapt to kind of what you need. When I was designing the system, I was watching a lot of Cult of Rig and the stuff Raph was talking about, and he had some really good stuff. His talk on naming conventions is not the most exciting topic. It's super valuable because it's so important. And the key takeaway I took from him was he made his modules or components encapsulated, right? Like even though in Maya they're not actually one node, they have a defined entry point and a defined input and a defined output, and nothing but the module itself can touch anything in between. And that has made the whole system so much more flexible than trying to write these kind of ways where you're connecting modules and then they go and try to like modify something in there. Like an example that we dealt with at when I was at Toonbox was we had the leg module, right? And then we had different feet. Now, if you're going to do a standard reverse foot, well, it has to access the IK handle. So what do you do? And what we did there was we had a custom, if you say I'm connecting a foot to a leg, it would say, okay, if I'm connecting foot A, or say like a foot and a paw, because we had animals. So you had like a foot to the leg, it connects it in this way. And if you do the paw to the leg, it runs a separate method. And like, well, that's not scalable, right? Because then you're going in and writing all these custom, like you're trying to figure out all the different scenarios and writing custom things to it. Whereas the kind of stuff that Raph talks about in his streams is just like you just kind of keep it generic. Like it has a certain type of data, whatever that is going in, be it a matrix or a vector or a point or a float or anything like that, and that's it. Like it just has kind of a standard thing. So I kind of work to try to standardize the connection methods, so you can connect an eyeball to the end of the leg if you want to. It's just a standard. It's a standard kind of flexible system.
Yeah, and I agree, and we are guilty on that. We have like what we call connectors. So normally it's a standard connector, and it's hidden for the user. Like what it does, it's normally some basic parenting or very, very simple operation. But in the specific case of the foot and leg, we have custom connector, and it's just a reimplementation of like little method that knows how to handle the connection with different legs or different foot. And yes, it's true, if you have like we have one foot actually, and we have different legs, and depending on you have two connectors, one for
Right.
the 3 bone legs and one for the 2 bone legs. Even so, yes, if I will need to keep growing this library and more foods and that, it's yeah, it's a problem actually.
What what I decided to do for that particular situation, it's the only place I've had to do it so far, is just have support for inheritance.
Mhm.
So I have the leg module that just stops at the ankle, and then currently to date I only have a biped foot. It's all I've needed so far.
Mhm.
So that inherits from the leg module. Both it inherits its kind of its whole like guide templates and all its build processes. So basically, then, but then it also has these extra guides for the heel and the toe and the
Mhm.
and stuff. So when you then build that, it'll go and first, build the parent module, and then, but because it's inherited, it has access to, it knows the name of the IK effector and,
Yes.
all that jazz, and it kind of goes in. So I guess in some ways you could say, well, that's even more involved than having a custom connector.
Mhm.
Um, but it meant I didn't have to. It was kind of really tightly integrated, and I just,
Yeah.
for the nuances of my system, it worked better.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I'll probably have to use inheritance in a few other places. But
We don't have this inheritance. For instance, we have the superclass that for components. So, and we inherit from that. There's a lot of functionality and like kind of factory. So you just
mhm.
re-implement some of the methods. But really, we don't have like from ARM, and we want to make like a second variant of the ARM with some changes. We don't have this inheritance, and that made me think like yeah,
You have to be
that's
careful with it.
interesting.
Yeah, because so I use it only in these situations where there'd be like an extra part of the module that has to like access the inner workings
Hmm.
of another one, and it couldn't be done just through an import and output port.
Hmm.
Because one thing I've seen in some systems, and I've no idea if MGer does this, but I've seen a few that say they have a generic limb, right? Because an arm and a leg, like
No,
there's a lot of similarities between them, right?
no, we don't have.
But I found that that ultimately can come back to bite you later. Like you're saying, okay, well, I don't want to have duplicate code, right? Where I say I
Hmm.
have an arm setup and a leg
Hmm.
setup that are like 80% similar, apart from
Yes,
some, aim axes or whatever else you're doing, right?
yes.
But then the problem comes where it's like you want to fix it. You find a bug in the arm and you try to
Mm.
fix it, and you fix it, and then that introduces a bug in the leg because the leg is doing something, and you're kind of playing this
Yes,
balancing act.
yes.
Whereas I'd rather have more code duplicity, but saying like each module is an island into itself, right?
Yeah.
Apart from these like kind of conservatively used inheritance structures, like my arms and my legs are totally separate.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I agree with that. There's this something like act of balance, also like how much you inherit. Like for instance, you was putting these examples, and first I think it's totally doable. I just can grab one of the components and inherit to another one, like instead of from the like main superclass, like,
mhm.
and probably will. I mean, because it's the same. Just need to override some of the methods, and probably will work. I'm not sure about the MRO if the it will have some issues with the how to load the libraries or method resolution to to I will need, but I think should work like probably without changing anything, just grabbing one of the components and overwriting a few of the classes.
Mhm.
And and I should try that. But yeah, then you have this. If you change the parent class, how it's gonna affect all the inheritance. And the other thing is like it's the other way around. If I have 3 arms and I find a bug and I know this code is shared with the other arms, I need to go and edit 3 times the same code to fix the bug I found in one.
Yeah, it's the trade-off, but
Yeah.
I think ultimately when it's I'd rather have to do if you have to fix the same bug in 3 places, it's the second two, the first one takes a long time, and then
Oh
the
yeah, it's
second two
copy
are
paste.
fast, right?
Yeah.
Because it's copy paste, or at least you can compare the two files. Like, okay, just gonna change this a little bit. So
Yeah.
I'd rather have that trade-off than have the risk of introducing more bugs like unintentionally.
Yeah.
When you change something and then it
Yeah.
it has its fingers tied. It's like, trying to pull one noodle from a plate of like noodles without like anything else moving. Like they're all interconnected, and it becomes,
Yeah.
from a tools design perspective, it becomes, a lot more difficult, right? To maintain.
Yes, and yeah, I agree. I think that it's more or less controllable. Even it's maybe some, yeah, like you say, trade-offs, but this version of the component is like that, and it's mono kind of is there, and if I change something else, it's gonna stay like the same way. And we use also a lot, like, I don't know if you use that, like a lot of customization per project sometimes. So what it means is, like, we have these components that there's a ever-growing list, like, but then we have per project we have variants of that components. It's just little things there and there that we
Now,
adjust, like
are those
micro
are those
changes.
separate, like
Yep.
complete separate entities in the code?
Yeah. So we just like do another version and change a little stuff or things like that. Some stuff is exposed, let's say, on the user interface configuration, and like the most common thing, but we don't expose everything. So
Yeah,
we
that's definitely a challenge. Like whenever we, so again, like we're we're just kind of in the pre-production phase of the first production that my system has been used on. So we're inevitably coming up with, okay, well, we need a module to do this, or a module to that, or we need to make a change to this. And whenever we come to design it, we're like, okay, so the question I'm always asking myself is, how can I make this in a way that will be usable in other productions? But inevitably, like, there are, one-offs that you just
yeah,
have to do.
I agree.
And the module library is organized by kind of type, right? So you have like, you have ARM modules, deformer modules, generic modules and stuff. And then we just made a project specific folder.
Yeah.
So they kind of go in there, and then when that project hits the end of its lifetime, those modules can just be retired. So that whole folder could just kind of go away, and then it'll still be in Git if we ever like need to resurrect something, right?
Yes.
But we can just get rid of them.
Yeah, absolutely. In my case, like because I mean, I'm not like full-time developing. I'm also doing like production assets and supervising and everything. So it's a bit more convoluted, my structure in like how I work. And I have to recognize, like, sometimes where we are in the like, I will say, the trench of crunch project, like, I just take the code, just copy here, brute force, change the stuff, name it like really like absolute none as a good way to do the things, but it's safe the day. And if the, like you say, normally this is for this project, or even for specific characters that have a very unique design, that it's for, so the name, it's like I don't know, monster B arm. It's just for this monster. It's not for anything else. Not like, and if it's useful enough, it becomes part of the main library.
Yeah, you
Like
can
clean up
port it back
after.
into the
Yeah,
main
exactly.
system.
So this is how. So first, quick and dirty. Then you show your value, and you come of the VIP class.
Yeah, no, it's true. That's a constant. That's a constant battle. I should get the poster you have under your door and put it in my office. Done is better than perfect. You could fall into like, this is the way the system has to work, but at the end of the day, it's like, well, you need to get rigs to animators, and you have to, get stuff done on time. But I think too, you can kind of, if you structure your rigging pipeline or your system in a certain way, you can kind of make room for little sandboxes where you just,
Oh yeah.
glue and tape things together, and then it doesn't have to pollute the whole system.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like I will compare maybe with like high cuisine and fast food. That each has its moment, and you can enjoy both in a high levels with the good measure. Like if you have like super awesome food every day, maybe you get bored of that, and you craving for maybe something fast, and the other way around. So from time to time, just having a quick hamburger or something like that is not gonna hurt you, and it can be satisfactory and get the job
So
done.
one of the interesting trade-offs there is that I'm designing a system for episodic TV, and sometimes they can run a long time, right? Like Paw Patrol we're in like season 7 or 8 now.
Yeah, it's
right.
I'm
So
following.
it's
I'm
been
following
going
that
for a
one,
while.
so I know it's a lot. My kids watch that almost every week. So
there are rigs in that show that are 8 years old. For better or worse. And so I'm trying to think about that. Like I have no idea how long the show I'm working on now or a show in the future will run, and so trying to kind of be deliberate about those decisions. Because one thing that we've encountered is on previous shows is that you'd have, like, say, a minor asset like a prop that's used in 5 shots, right?
Yes.
So it's like, okay, it's a prop that's used in 5 shots. They give it to a junior rigger, right? Who's in their first year of working, and they rig it, and they do their best. But in this example, they're rigging everything by hand, right? So they rig all this stuff by hand, and maybe they make some questionable decisions. And then later it goes on to be featured in a whole episode. So now it's in, a couple hundred shots.
Yes.
And it becomes a major problem. Suddenly, instead of one animator touching it for a few shots, you have 30 animators touching it for a whole week.
Yes.
And it kind of becomes this problem. So you kind of want to, like, I'm protective of, like, the integrity of the rig assets. I've tried to structure the system around so, like, you can't try to, like, minimize bad decisions.
Yeah, but this is also happening. I mean, for like non like small assets, but for something that it's like maybe one character that is a minor character in for few episodes, and then it becomes the main character after 2 seasons, for instance, or and you need to improve it, and so that's something that's very interesting. How do you, like, handle these long-term projects, and not only maintainability, like but also to the ability to improve assets? That's something I always struggle to find the right ways.
I can tell you my approach, but it hasn't been proven yet. Because, so I guess to back up, like, or to go back to that analogy of this, like, minor asset that becomes a major thing, is that when you're designing a system for episodic TV, where the pace is fast, and oddly enough, there's often, like, some really difficult rigging challenges in kids TV, because they just do these outlandish gags all the time, and you have to just kind of do stuff that you might not encounter in some other projects. And we have riggers of all different skill levels, right? We have some experienced riggers, we have riggers that are fresh out of school, and a bunch of different ideas. And one of the major problems I kind of identified when I was looking at the system is consistency, right? And keeping rig quality and rig structure and naming convention and everything as consistent as possible. Because as an animator, they're working, like, they have 2 assets in a shot, and they might have been rigged 3 years apart, right?
Yeah.
Like, you have one of the dogs in Paw Patrol, and then you have one of their vehicles, which is new this episode, and they're rigged by different people, and the person who rigged the dog isn't even at the studio anymore, and then the control shapes are different because people have different opinions, and colors are a little different, and so they're switching between these 2 assets within the same shot, and they have to, like, mentally jump around in terms of, like, well, where is this attribute on this thing? Where do I switch to IK?
I see. This is
major
kind of
things. So,
I think. Yeah. Oh.
And this isn't a problem you'd probably encounter if you're working on a VFX film and the whole production run is 6 months, right? like you wouldn't, it's not the kind of same issue. So I have to think about stuff from kind of longevity. And the approach I took is, or at least that I'm trying out, is to be a little totalitarian about it. In that
sounds
scary. It is, and some of the riggers on the team will be laughing if they listen to this. But the idea I took is that, like, you can't do anything that's not done through the system. Well, you can. There is a scapegoat. You can add like your own custom build scripts in there that do extra stuff. But the idea is that, like, for example, when you go to publish the rig, you have no option of doing anything manually. It builds the rig and immediately publishes it. So anything has to be done through the build process, right? You have your data, you have your build instructions, right? And that's it. That everything happens through there. So I've tried to kind of make like official workflows for everything, right? There's like an official way to, do this or hook this up or anything like that. And that lets me kind of keep things consistent, because that all ties into the back end of the system. So if I change the naming convention, I go to my name configuration, code, and I update that, and then that just as soon as you build another rig, it'll all propagate and update through there. And it was very interesting watching some of the riggers adapt to this mindset. They're like, but I just want to do this, right? Like I just want to do this. And like, but you can't. Like, but why not? Like, well, because I haven't written it yet. There's no code for it yet. Or maybe I have a reason why. Like, well, no, there's a reason why we don't want to do that, because it affects rig performance. Or we had like, as an example, there's no support for set-driven keys in my system at present, because we kind of made a deliberate decision with animation that we didn't want to go down that road for our own reasons. So people are like, but I can't do set-driven keys. Like, no, like, really? But so as I said, I had to kind of take this kind of totalitarian approach, but it means that the rigs are all built in a very, very standard way. For sure. I mean, it's still a flexible system. It's designed to meet production needs, right? So if you need to rig whatever you can, there are tools there, but it's, I think where a lot of kind of auto riggers go is that they're kind of like a macro rather than like an integrated system, right? It's like, hey, I'm going to go build a control rig for you, and now here, go make your monolithic Maya file, right? And then maybe they have things to import and export stuff. So like, okay, well, I want to, I need to move a pivot point. So I'm going to go and, okay, I'm going to save all my deformation data, and then I'm going to try to rebuild the thing and do it, and then bring it all back together. It becomes this whole kind of hassle. Versus saying, like, let's actually do this as an integrated system that just builds. It's like a factory, right? Like you have materials go on one end and you have the product come out the other. And that kind of like ties everything in a lot kind of more cohesively.
Yeah, I feel you. And for instance, at Anima, where I'm working now, we do many different kind of projects. So we have short projects, little like as maybe days sometimes, and we have projects that run for several years. So we have all the variations. So, and yes, when it's a long project, everything is more standardized, but at the same time we try, I mean, we have to keep open the door to like handmade quick things, like one shot thing that is one shot because it's just really a small project. I'm not big fan of that, especially if it comes back and I want the second 6 months later and no. And I'm big proponent of standardization. And for instance, one thing we do at the rigging team is we try to keep the assets assigned to one person, but we don't have the ownership of this asset. Means everybody any moment can open or edit an asset that was created by someone else, like a few weeks ago or last year.
Yeah, because in production, you could have someone could be working on something, and if they're kind of rigging manually and they're trying to come up with some solution to this thing, and they're halfway through it, and then they get sick
Yeah.
or they quit or whatever, and they leave, and then someone else has to open their asset, and they have to like for what on earth they were doing, trying to
Yeah.
find all this stuff. Maya's node editor doesn't do you any favors in that regard, right? Just trying to like pick apart someone else's rig, and it's a huge waste of time, to be honest. Like, and so when you standardize stuff, however you do that, whether you do it all through like custom UIs, or you do it, just that the Maya scene files are incredibly structured in a certain way, and there's standard processes for how you do, whatever, and naming conventions, and you take that seriously, it does mean that anyone else can pick up anyone's file. And, or, as a supervisor, you can just open someone else's stuff, and you don't have to, you can just, go right to the point instead of just trying to make sense of what they're doing.
Yeah, for instance, I have an example I think I can talk about. It's we did this series for Monster Strike. It's a cell phone game here, very very popular in Japan. And we did the series that was for internet, for YouTube, and then we did the theatrical movie, like maybe 2-3 years almost apart one each other, like 2 years and a half, something like that. So we took all the assets that was done like 2 years before, and we upgraded for the movie, reusing almost everything that we had, but we just polish and improve it, and also update it for latest features on the rigs, things that was not ready the first time. And that was fairly like straightforward. The other thing is, like, I will say we have these different levels of flexibility or freedom for riggers, if you want to say it. Like, one is like this standardization, that is this totalitarian way that you do this with these components, and the rest is serialized with these tools that we give you to serialize the stuff. And you have these custom steps, that is basically scripts that run in order to execute or to build that. Then normally it's created at the beginning of the show for create the original templates, and then reused by everybody. Share, many of them are share, means nobody touch it, and it changed for all the characters. And some are very specific for the character, because the needs of the design, things like that. And in extreme situations, we do something that just create a mini rig by hand, save it as a Maya file, and we just bring that and plug it with a script. That it's like so from going from the most standardized thing to having some freedom, but not completely. So the base should be always this, and then you have some insertion points where, if the case it's needed or it's convenient.
Yeah, and that totally makes sense, depending, like in a studio like yours, if you're doing these really short form, projects, then yeah, you do need, complete flexibility. And this is where like really, rigging tools kind of, I think, are best when they're bespoke to a studio, right? Or bespoke to a certain workflow, because you can when you need to generalize stuff, you kind of have to, there generally have to be some sorts of sacrifices. There either has to be sacrifices made, or there has or a substantial increase in complexity, right? But right now we kind of do, at the very least, the shortest project we would do is 1 year, right? It'd be like 1 season, that'd be the shortest. But we're still even looking for, a system that will work from show to show to show. So we're kind of trying to make it standardized. But if Guru had like a commercial division or a VFX division or something, we would totally need something that was much more like, you can just kind of throw duct tape at it and
duct taping.
And at the end of the day, you just need to get the shot out, right?
We try to avoid it as much as possible, to be honest. It's something that and it's more like the system allows you whatever you want, but it's more like a workflow rules, like a standardization agreement between the team. Like, we do this and we don't do that for this show, and this is how it goes. And what we never ever do is like what I call the asset centric, that it's open an asset, run a script, change something on the asset, save the asset. That it's a no, doesn't matter the size of the project. No. One thing is to have a mini rig, something very specific for specific point that probably is very simple to open and understand what's going on there. But the other is like editing assets. That's not the goal.
Yeah, and those, particularly if you're doing anything long format and you're doing asset centric like that, then it's, you know, feature creep comes in and stuff, and these files just become, you know, ridiculous. Do you have anything in MGear that handles when the kind of foundation of data changes? We talked about this a little bit with renaming modules, but like the big thing is like model changes, right?
Yeah.
You know, when you have like data centric stuff, and then all of a sudden, okay, well, you come in with different proportions, or you come in with different you know, topology changes, right? Like you're adding in edge loops, or just, you know, it was the sculpt got changed or whatever.
Yes, we do. I mean, it depends of course, if you change topology and proportions and UVs and everything, so you don't have basically anything to grab to use as a bridge between data. So there is a point that you cannot, I mean, unless you process with maybe in the future with an AI and understand what's going on, but we are not yet there, not yet coming. But we do have some tools. Well, the most basic, first, we have like simple tools to copy skin, things like that. So topology, simple topology chains, is like this. We have another tool much more refined called Flex that was developed by Jerome. He created this tool that it's similar. I would say similar. Do you know? Do you use Softimage in the past? Do you know?
No, I haven't.
It has these.
I played with ice for like a couple hours. That was about it.
Well, there was a Gator that was transferring all the attribute data, things like that. So we can just put another geometry things and different topology, and it will try to transfer everything from wave maps, skinning, blend shapes, things like that. And it will like have like a nice like table explaining what is transferring and so on, and you can update like that. So normally, if we have big change, we have the rig, the asset build. We take the new geometry. We transfer all the data from one to another, re-export the data, and then we continue from there to rebuild again. So we don't use that transfer as is. We just assign between, but you can use it. I mean, if it's commercial.
Well, it's a migration. At the end of the day, then the rigger still needs to take ownership over the data, you know, that produces the rig that they send out. But yeah, I've been thinking about that. It's one of the major kind of development things on my list, is how to, you know, if you have just a topology change, then you can kind of, you can interpolate, right? Like you can figure out, like if you're just inserting an edge loop, right? You can kind of diff the two meshes and build a table between them of, you know, what vert on the old mesh associates with the new one, and then you get these things in between. You can, you know, interpolate it a bunch of different ways and stuff, and do something.
Please check it out.
You can kind of do something if it's just a sculpting change. You could kind of analyze the geometry around guide pivot positions and stuff and try to change stuff. But then, like, what happens when you have both? when the character is scaled up by like 10% and you added in edge loops at the same time, like, what do?
You can, I mean, it's case by case in many situations. I think there is always ways to transfer data, but yeah, you need to be case by case, and some edge cases probably it's no way to do it. But yeah, if you're interested, I mean, the tool, it's open source, it's there. You can go and dig in the code. It's MIT licensed, so you can grab whatever you want. There's no string attachment or anything. The other thing is, like, we heavily our lesson in studio, and I recommend everybody, we use ng-skin tools. That it helps a lot, and it has some like skin transfer tools that help when you don't have the same number of joints, different namings, things like that. You can transfer with different like algorithm, like per vertex ID or proximity, things like that, or by name, or for the joints and things like that. and the other is it's shapes from Brave Rabbit. These two tools are my go-to, and basically because I use these tools, I don't care to implement the same functionality on a gear because I mean, at the end of the day, what I need to do is the work, and these tools are amazing. The developers are much more brilliant than me, so I'm not even trying. And Shapes has a really, really great thing. You can transfer by proximity and things like that, so you can transfer stuff, but also you can export the deltas. So when it's a big change of proportions, you can kind of export the deltas. So you have, if you have the same topology, for instance, but different proportions, like universal topology, for instance, you can reuse a lot because you apply the other rig or corrective system or something that you did another character, and the first time you apply, it's gonna break all because the blend shapes are triggering the other shape of the character, but you can export the delta separated. So when you build, you can re-import the delta, so it's gonna reset all the deltas and it's gonna import the deltas based on the current character. So boom, you have like a high probability to reuse a lot of stuff.
Yeah, no, that's pretty cool. I could in theory do that with my system. Haven't had a need to. Where we store blend shapes as a delta, just the attribute in JSON, rather than the whole kind of blend shape target, like in a mesh file or whatever, or my file. But yeah, you could totally do that because then you can just figure out if the mesh is the same, you could figure out the delta between that, between each vertice of the base mesh and the updated one, and then add that on to whatever blend shape deltas you have.
Local space thing. Yeah, I mean, this is why it's, I mean, because we use shapes, and shapes is designed that the first time, I mean, when you exports like classic blend shapes in a Maya file with the like copies basically of the name, the blend shape targets, copy of the object. So we have to import twice. But yeah, if England that is the developer, maybe change for future versions that exports only the delta, so we will not even need it to do this second step. So it's just like we rely on the tool, and it's how it works. It's not big burden for me. You don't do it.
On a side note, one thing we do use is Brave Rabbit has a smooth weights brush that is super good. If anyone listening hasn't tried it, it's miles ahead of Maya's. And if you don't want to use NG skin tools for whatever reason, it's just an artisan brush, so it doesn't affect your scene in anything. There's no dependencies. But yeah, like what you're kind of saying, using these other tools, this is kind of one of the trade-offs to like having a super integrated system, is that when I've looked at shapes and stuff like that, and there's a lot of great stuff in it, but I don't know how I'd integrate it into my system, right? Like when your system becomes really tightly integrated, then you almost need to, do everything yourself, right?
Yeah, that's the reason. Like we used, I mean, Shape basically, if you're curious how it exports like these files, that it's a couple of Maya files. One that contains the blend shape target objects, like classic Maya blend shapes. The other contains some nodes, some information, and then you have a Mel file that if you have these three files, you can drag and drop it, and it will load it. And what we do is on one of the custom steps, we just evaluate that Mel, and it will work.
Does the Mel file like actually hold the deltas in it? Like it's just a bunch of...
it's the targets, the Maya file targets, and then he has this JSON format that exports the delta that you can reuse. But it's not. Maybe he will do it on the future, and I know he's working on a new update because he did it on Python. He hit some walls somewhere in the past. He moved it refactor to Mel. It's full Mel, this tool, and now he's working on back to Python to have better integration with pipelines, so and better handlers and hooks. So probably in the next future releases, I hope he pull it off and it's more integratable. Like really, you can just call shapes on your libraries and do stuff and things like that. So you can get it as a module that.
Yeah, because if there's like even a simple API for it where you can just call it, without the UI, then you can integrate that into your build process, right? You can have one of your build instructions just call that command and save that data and stuff like that. But yeah, you need to make it toolable.
Yeah, and I know Ingo is working on that, and it's been working for long. Indeed, the other day I was checking something, and I found out that there is some Python libraries already included in the latest release. It's not documented yet. I think it's still work in progress, but it's coming. So maybe it's worth the research for future. If you don't have anything started yet, it's worth to try that one.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I'll definitely have to take a look at it.
And yeah, and same for shapes. I know Vitoras it's also working on the 2.0. There is a beta already on the website with a lot of improvements in many areas. So yeah, I think this is my like trinity, like M-Gear, shapes, and G-Skin. That's the tools if I don't have it, I not rig. I just will do something else nowadays.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah. I guess sometimes I get a little not tunnel vision, but it's been a long time since I've done any actual production asset work. Probably not since 2015 or 2016.
Oh.
So I've just been kind of full blown into development. So it's always good to kind of keep in mind, like just using other things and stuff. But like I said, I think I've signed into a system where I'm too tightly integrated, and there's a lot of advantages to that.
No, yeah, I'm totally agree. I mean, super cool, and I think, yeah, I mean, to having this and to have the opportunity to invest this time on your system for Guru and specific for the projects that you do, it must have a lot of advantages for your environment than just having something. This is always like that. I mean, in my case, I take that because I don't have any other time to do that. So, and these tools are great, but if you have the opportunity to tailor everything for your needs, I mean, it's no doubt it's gonna be way better by orders of magnitude. I think it's that's the key. And it's like to think, like, this Toyota that did this, I think how they revolutionized the after like Ford did the how you call the Henry Ford did the
assembly line.
The assembly line. Then Toyota did like this book that is used in many places, where how they reduce the friction in this assembly line to be much more efficient and reduce the amount of error. And I think if you can do that for one studio, like taking what you do and reduce the frictions and very specific to one like, let's say, goal, it's I mean, I'm pretty sure without touching your system, I know it's gonna be much better for this specific.
Yeah, it's interesting you brought up the thing about Toyota. There's a story, and I'm going to reiterate, I don't know how accurate this will be, or even how true it is, but apparently at some point, an American car manufacturer, be it Ford or GM or Chevrolet or whatever, they had their assembly lines, and at the end of the assembly line, they had a guy with a mallet, like a big rubber hammer, who would like hammer stuff that wasn't fitting properly, just to kind of like get it into place. And apparently at one point, these executives went and visited Toyota, I believe it was Toyota, and they were touring the assembly line, so I was wondering how they were able to produce cars for, I guess more affordable or whatever. And they're like, well, where's the guy with the hammer? They have no guy with the hammer at the end of the assembly line. And they said, well, we just designed it to fit right at the beginning.
Yeah, something I know this, and it's been applied, this philosophy, not like the assembly line that sounds a bit hard to say, like everybody will think about Charles Chaplin Tense Moderns with It's not like that. It's more like to make more easy and human, and the people, that's one thing, and reduce the friction means you don't need to walk 10 steps to grab one tool, and so having that
Yeah.
it's more efficient. Everything is what I meant. When systems are
Yeah, but
like this.
it's interesting. It's an interesting idea for just pipelines in general, because often, particularly when it comes to pre-existing pipelines, we just try to like, sometimes pipelines start to crumble because they become the victim of band-aid fixes, right? And it's like, well, really, you just actually have to take the step back, even though it can be harder in the beginning, will actually kind of save you time, in the long run, right?
I have like one example, like I can give. I'm not gonna give names, but I've been working with a system that okay, so it was very, like, let's say, like mGear, it tried to apply to different flexible, different kind of projects, but and let's say mGear solve 90% of your problems, and this 10%, it's you need to do it by yourself. Okay, so I'm not gonna make complex mGear to solve this 10 extra percent that is edge cases or situations. So you have the flexibility or to create a new component or use custom steps, or even if you want to make a mini rig or something and just import it and plug it. So that obviously doesn't cover all the situations that you will have, but if you try to solve this extra 10% edge cases, what it becomes is a super complex rig system that has tons of options, tons of complexity, and it takes forever, and it's not nice to work with that, because it has a lot of friction with the person. But if you do your system for a very specific goal or very specific pipeline, then you can have this extra 10% without going for the complexity of the flexibility of the unknown, because your environment. So I think this is the big advantage there.
It's true, but there's also it still applies to what the situation I'm in, because like I said, I have kind of taken in a more all-encompassing thing. And one thing I knew from the beginning is that the power of a library-based system is that once you have a module for something, then you don't have to solve that problem again. And you can put a lot of energy and attention to detail in designing that one module. You can have a higher quality than you would if you were just making them one-off, for every asset that needs it. But the trade-off to that is that, well, what happens when you don't have a module? And not everyone can make one, because you need to be tied into the whole development system, to do that. So how do you do that? And that's currently the place I'm in right now, because we're kind of in pre-production. All of a sudden, we're like, hey, we need this, and like we don't have that, so I need to go kind of make it. And it's just myself, and I have one other guy, working with me, who's helping in the development. So you kind of get stuck in that, right? And but then I guess then the question is well, how, from a studio and I guess like software maintaining, perspective and stuff, how open do I make that? So I could theoretically, you can write your own, build process script, and you can do anything, right? You have Python, you can, kind of do whatever. But at the same time, like the rigs I've made are, very unconventional in how they're structured and stuff. So how do you kind of balance that? Is it okay to just say, okay, well, this asset is just going to have, this thing stuck in there that is completely different from the rest of the rig, but it met production? Like how do you kind of balance that? It's like I said, it's the idealism with the, like, at the end of the day, animators need rigs by this date.
I understand this. This is always, I mean, I think, it's always this balance, and how you keep it like, that's a difficult question, honestly.
Well, I don't think there's necessarily, you're right, it's a balance. There's no one solution to it. Like you didn't say, okay, well, we'll let this through, but then we have to go back and fix it. But then what does that do to animation libraries or previous shots? Or it becomes a bit of a nightmare. Like what I'm trying to stay ahead of it by we're reading through scripts and flagging stuff that we don't have and trying to develop it ahead of time. But that's, it's not completely sustainable. Right now I'm just running on a treadmill ahead of everyone else, just trying to make sure I have all the stuff I need, right?
Yeah. Well, I think, man, we should repeat this podcast maybe in a few months or 1 year or something, and look back or conversation and think how I think will be very interesting follow up on this, because I really I think we are battling the same things in many fronts, and it's I think only experience can teach you that, and having a lot of failures and some success will guide to the right point in each situation, and definitely, yeah, there's a yeah a lot of common ground, or what it's like similar school of how I think we like to do the things, that it's I think I'm very interested to share that and to know like how other people battles these situations, because yeah, I have to learn a lot, and I guess it will everybody open even talking about this with someone else, it make you think stuff that it was probably not obvious when at first, but when you talk about that, then you realize, oh wow, why I didn't see that before, why I didn't realize that. It's so clever that it's how it's possible that I didn't see it before. And
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's
no, for sure. That's why it's great to talk to people like that. And there's not lots of information about designing
yeah,
rigging systems, right?
yeah,
Thankfully, right now, there's information on how to build rigs.
yeah,
There's actual content. Like when I got started, like I said, there was like hardly any. There were a couple books, but it was always like
yeah,
half tied to the Maya version or whatever it was.
yeah.
So yeah, it's cool. It's cool. It's
Yeah, it's yeah, for me it's I mean, now it's yeah, the most interesting, like I would say, frontier. Like, it's not, for me it's not anymore about like you said, like before, like, oh, you have IKFK, you have a banking on the foot, ooh, it's soft IK, ooh. So it was kind of this feature rich rig kind of gold rush thing.
yeah.
Not anymore. Even having a rig with all the features is not even desirable.
Yeah, that's true. Like I had a student. I teach both Python and rigging at like a local college, and had a student who actually works with me now. He's super passionate about rigging, and he was so excited. And he kept, I'd come in each week and I'd say, like, what have you been working on? Because I know he'd always been going to do stuff, and he'd always be trying these outlandishly complicated things, right? They were kind of like above his ability to understand. It was great, he's diving in and experimenting and learning and stuff. And I kept trying to tell him, like, like it's not about the features, like stop trying to do fancy stuff and like really kind of focus on the foundations, right? And one thing that I find that's really interesting in rigging is that often I find there's like this tribal knowledge, right? Where someone says, oh, well, there's this setup that's really good, and sometimes people just accept it without really kind of diving into the why. Right? Like the one I like to pick on is ribbons, right? And I've heard people say, like, oh, ribbons, you can make ribbons and they don't flip. Like, well, yes, they do. Just depends on how you do it, right?
How much you twist.
Yeah, like the only way to make it not flip is to use like a twistiform. It's like, but it's like without kind of really kind of thinking about, well, what actually is the problem I'm trying to solve, and how do I kind of get to that solution, right? And instead of like, well, these are a bunch of recipes and these little like, kind of tricks and setups that I learned, or I watched a tutorial on this, or I heard they use this at this studio, or whatever, without thinking like, well, what problem am I actually trying to solve? Because like a big, a thing that I think is really important is that as riggers, we have to make rigs for animators, not rigs for ourselves. When you come across people designing rigs and they're putting in something because they think it's cool, or they think it's clever, or they're trying to try out a new technique or whatever, but it's not actually in service of the animator, working with that asset.
Yes.
and it's basically like user experience design, right? You know, you have to, like, the animators, I think Raf said this in Cult of Rig, and he said it really well, is that like your rig is like a piece of software, and animators touch your rig more than they touch Maya.
Yes.
Like animators don't use Maya that much. They use the viewport, they use the time slider, the channel box, and the graph editor, and some shelf buttons made by the TDs at their studio, right? Like they're not doing that much, but they click your rig every other second, right? Like every other time they do, they're grabbing a control and they're moving it. And if they move that controller and it's not behaving in the way that they expect it to, or they have to counter animate, then it doesn't matter how clever the setup is, like the rigger kind of failed to deliver something that enables the animators to do their job.
Yeah, that's
because like nothing we do gets rendered, right? I mean, okay, to a point. I mean, like good quality deformations. I guess I'm speaking more about the control rig, right?
Yeah.
Like the control rig doesn't get rendered. It doesn't make it on the screen. If it weren't for animators, we'd have T-poses, you know, just moving through shots.
Big proponent T-pose animation.
So like that relationship with animators and like involving animators in the design process, right? Like when you're rigging something, like, you know, talk to the animator who might be working on, like, well, what do you need? Like, how do you actually, you know, how do you want to interact with this? How would you expect to work with that? And I think that's like one of the most underrated skills in rigging. Understanding how an animator thinks, and understanding how to work with an animator, and like not just necessarily give them what they ask for, but find out what they need and come up with an actual solution for it, right?
Yeah, that is like, like experience, also communication, and sometimes also like it depends of the, I mean, you need to know the person. Some people, animators, they're really good asking, I need to do this specific thing, and others are, I want one control here, or what, or, you know, so there is always this social also, I think, that you need to learn by experience, that it's very, very important, not only the pure technical or artistical skills, but also the communication skills. I will say that this is also something that complements the others. I don't know how you see that.
Yeah, no, for sure. And it totally depends on who you have to work with. I've worked with animators who are fantastic at coming up with ideas, like, you know, just kind of out of the box thinking, like, I want to try and do this, and, you know, is that possible? And maybe it is, maybe it isn't. And I've worked with other animators who are like, I want it the way they were on the last show, because I don't want to learn something new. I want it to be exactly the same, right? And it's like two completely different extremes. But at the end of the day, you're not, you know, the riggers aren't the ones animating it. Like, if that's actually what the animation team agrees on, they want it like the last thing, like, well, you might think it sucks, but so what? You know, that's, at the end of the day, your job is to make something that they like, or not that they like, that helps them do their job, right?
Yeah, I'm yes, I agree with that, but also I agree that you need to guide, or at least to don't accept, like, without any thinking, any, like, you need to guide them, like, if they, like, you think is, I mean, obviously if it's something that it's makes sense and everything is, but sometimes they ask for something, but if you ask for what the why, no, they won't, they will say, I need to do this, and then you can maybe recommend, okay, maybe this is a good idea what you're asking for, but maybe you can do it this other way, that maybe it's even easier, or it's helpful. So this,
for sure. And that's what I say, you need to figure out what they need, not just what they want, because and sometimes they'll ask things that are just don't make sense, right?
Yeah. So do what I want, not what I ask.
Exactly. Like but yeah, because I think the things with animators is that depending on their technical aptitudes, right? They have their kind of realm of possibilities, right? Like this is what I know you can do. But then as a rigger or a character TD, you're going to have a broadened, you know, perspective of like, oh, you know what, I could actually write a plugin that would, you know, do something like this. It would actually make this work even better. Like, oh, really? Okay, yeah. Then you can try to kind of work with it. But it's that relationship. And I think I came across like some meme or something on LinkedIn a year ago where it was kind of poking fun at like how animators and riggers like fight, kind of hate each other, and it just bothered me because I was like, really, like that? I
No,
mean,
it's
like
not
I know
like
that
that.
happens, but that's and it's funny because it's true, but it's not what you want, right?
Yeah,
You
yeah,
need to
it's
have a relationship of mutual
sometimes.
respect,
Yeah,
meaning that like you need to communicate to animators that like, I'm actually here to serve you and to like, yes, I have my own deadlines that I need to meet, but me meeting my deadlines means that you actually have something that you can use.
yes,
And you kind of have that mutual respect that
yeah,
you're trying to work with them rather than them being like, these kind of demanding, you know, this other demanding people that they're just
yeah,
never happy.
yeah,
Well, if they're never happy, you need to ask yourself why they're never happy.
yeah, and I think the other way up, I mean, it's completely applied. Like, I I think if looking on my career and works that I did, the best like rigs or the most satisfactory ones are the ones that work with an animator with a very specific persons that help me to push to go further on the quality of the rigs or some ideas or something, so sometimes it's, I mean, it's a teamwork. It's what I will say. It's not like just one direction, but it goes in both directions. And when this like teamwork, it's like I guess any other discipline, when you have a team that have some kind of like good communication connection, it goes to next level. Everything, animation,
Yeah.
rigging, everything.
Yeah, but it's a fairly unique position within a lot of within production, right? Like at the end of the day, like yeah, there like every department does have other dependencies. Like
Mm-hmm.
modelers need to make sure their assets are renderable and can be rigged and stuff like
Mm-hmm.
that. But it's not as tightly coupled, right? Like they're mostly making something a digital sculpture that looks good, right?
Mm-hmm.
And surfacers likewise, they're doing their thing, and it has to make sure it ties in with lighting and everything like that. Um, but like rigging, we're really one of the few departments where we're making a product to be used by another department.
Mm. And we are also in the middle of these departments.
Yeah,
The like connection between modeling, animation, and
yeah, exactly.
if you think about the formation, also like art direction, things like that is very important. That part.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah. Kyle, I'm sorry. To maybe we can wrap here the conversation because I
Yeah,
have
for
to
sure.
do other stuff today. But I I I really, I mean, I really want to continue another moment again this conversation. Maybe pick up from where we left, or like I say, like maybe in a few months or just 1 year
Yeah, for sure.
time frame where you have your first project already wrapped and maybe other projects going.
It won't
Maybe
be
we can.
wrapped for
Okay,
I think about a year, but yeah,
but
no, for sure,
maybe
it'd
we.
be great to carry it on. Like,
Yeah,
I'll have a different perspective on stuff in a few months and
yeah, that will be
know
super
what worked and
cool
what
to
didn't.
have it. And definitely, yeah, these like conversations about rigging systems and workflows and how to approach the production situations is something that I think like a riggers character to this community, we need to have more conversations, of more sharing of this, because I think this is something that's not enough anywhere to learn.
Yeah, no, it was great. I'd love to do it again.
Thank you so much.
All right, thank you.